We are giving you even more trade advice on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, including when should you sell high, our thoughts on league vetoes, and how do you start a trade talk, all that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Behind the Steel Curtain. And joining us today on Wednesday, of course, is Matt Williamson. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Check out his new YouTube channel as well. On today's show, we're taking a look at some more trade advice, including our thoughts on league vetoes, how to sell high. But Matt, I want to start with, how do you just initiate a trade talk? Because there might be some new listeners who are new to fantasy or just new to dynasty leagues. How do you even begin the part of doing a dynasty league?
I actually want to take this one step back even further, Matt. How do you identify your trade partner to begin with? I think that's the best place to start. And then once because you have to identify a trade partner before you get into the trade talk. So I'm going to take it one step back. How do you identify your trade partner?
Well, there's so many different times of the year in the dynasty cycle, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And I definitely think, around your rookie draft, everyone's chiming in. People want to make moves. That's obviously the best time for things. But it's a lot different technique than during the season or teams down the stretch run or trade deadline or and during the boring season, so I don't want to say this too much in this episode, but all of this is league dependent, time of the year dependent, heavily. You really need to read the room. You have to read, the feel for things too. Like there's a lot of trades being done in my leagues right now, but not nearly as there was a month ago or so. Now, I do think this time of year, if we're going to get specific, you could pay attention to who was trying to trade up for Jayden Daniels or Caleb Williams or needed a quarterback and didn't get one. Oh, I got an extra one on my roster. Maybe I can just throw them a bone there.
Still trying to offload Derek Carr, I see.
Funny you bring that up. I actually think he's slightly a buy low now. I mean, I just think because he's so low. I mean, you can't give him away. I just think a new, sort of like Pittsburgh, just a new offensive coordinator in New Orleans, I think can do some good things, but I don't want to get off on the Derek Carr. I'm not putting my name behind Derek Carr.
Sorry, I derailed this conversation, but
yes. Let's start super generic though for this topic. I mean, I think there is value to just going old school, update your trade bait, but the thing about updating your trade bait, like don't put Allen Robinson on there, like when everyone puts all their garbage that no one on the planet wants that they're going to cut anyways, no one even reads the email, like put two names, put Bijan and Stroud. Someone's going to bite.
You have to put names that people are actually going to be enticed to trade for. Like, do not put in bad faith the guys that I know, if you need to make room on a roster spot for another trade, that they're going to be the first players you cut. I don't care about those players. I don't care about your trade bait. If that's your trade bait, we need to work on the phrase trade bait, because the bait implies that there's something to be baited, and that is not baiting.
So, Matt, let's assume that you have a player that you want to target, right? Do you find that you have more success when you just send an offer, or when you maybe message or call your buddy and say, hey, I'm interested in X player. How can we get it done?
So I want to ask you guys this, because I'm in 6 dynasty leagues right now, and 90% of the folks in those leagues could walk right past me on the street and I don't know who they are. You know what I mean? Like,
really? Okay.
So I don't have personal relations with a lot of them, or, know what they do in their free time or what their jobs are, or blah, 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 blah. But I've also been in leagues with them for a long time too. And you know who's aggressive. And I'm sure you two have run into this. If you haven't, you're going to get it more and more. You're the only one that does this for the living in your league, and there's some that are less likely to tangle with you and aren't going to give you the extra third-round pick.
I was just say, I have a couple league mates that listen to this podcast daily. They're everydayers, so it makes it extra hard to try to trade. So that doesn't help. I will say, Matt,
real quick, isn't it the best? Like after we publish one of these, and then you get like I'm going to get an offer for Derek Carr tomorrow. Like
it's horrible. Like it's terrible.
Future first for Derek Carr. You want that? Like, no,
exactly. Yeah. I will say that I have only played in dynasty leagues where I know all of the other members. Okay. Right now, there might be a couple members that I don't know as well. But we actually talked about this on yesterday's podcast. One of the things that I do, and man, this is so nerdy. I have a notebook of every trade that has ever happened in my dynasty leagues. And that way, when I go back and I look at, or I'm looking at the team that I want to trade with, I can say, hey, these are the types of players they've acquired. They're more likely to go after young players than older players. They're more likely to value picks over younger players. And that kind of catalog helps me come up with a trade offer. But I love that. For me, it's a lot easier just to call or text the person and be like, hey, I really like this.
Marcus, it's 2024.
It's sending smoke signals if you want.
I still like the face-to-face interaction sometimes. Like,
Telegram.
Hey, what do you need to help me get this trade done? I found that to be the most successful.
See, I'm going to counter you. Here because this is actually one of my biggest pet peeves in dynasty leagues. I hate when people DM me and say, hey, I'm interested in this player. What do you need? Send me an offer.
That's hard, yeah.
And then, because you know what? If you're the one that's seeking out a player, I think you should be the one making the first. Like, why am I going to go and make the first move, right? I'm not looking to sell this player. You're looking to buy this player, right? Like,
so I should clarify. I'm mostly saying, hey, I like X player. I'm willing to give blank, blank, blank.
Well, that's totally fair. Yeah. And if you're posing a trade in your initial conversation, I think that's totally
just
fine.
To kind of get the ball moving a little bit.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a lot easier. I mean, yeah, sometimes I will pick up the phone if I have like a quick little message. Marcus, I had a question for you this morning, and you were like, can you just call me? So I guess that's like your old school dad vibes. But like, I understand that. And I do think sometimes it's easier to get to the point than to, put these marginal counters back and forth. But when it comes to the initial offer, like either you DM me the offer or you text me the offer or you send it straight up, that's fine. But my biggest pet peeve is when people ask me, what do you need, for me to get this player? I want you to come to the table with a thoughtful proposal, even if it's just a starting point, and don't make it a bad one. Make it a good one.
Matt, I've got another question for you when it comes to trading. Do you believe in the strategy of, hey, talk about one player and then go down maybe a level? So let's say you're interested in James Cook and this manager has Bijan Robinson and James Cook. Start on an offer for Bijan and then work your way down to James Cook? Or are you just going right after the player that you want?
I was going to mention that I think you get yourself into trouble. And trust me, it's happened a lot after I do videos with you guys or talking to Ryan for an hour, back in the day. It's like, there's a guy out there I really want, but I can't just go to that owner in all 6 leagues and be like, I'll give you the world for him. You can't just show all your cards. This is the buy low opportunity. We just talked about it for an hour on Dynasty Blueprint, Locked On Dynasty, whatever. And I can't just go in there guns a-blazing, diving in the deep end. It's this guy or bust. But I do think there is value to, you have 3 running backs I really like, but really there's one target. I'd settle for all 3. Are you interested in moving one? It looks like you're light at receiver. I mean, the way Kate mentioned, I thought was great. Like, you just don't go in and be like, what do you need for Bijan? I mean, and anytime anyone asks me that, I always respond with, I like Drake London, Devontae Smith, your future first, and you could put a package together, but I'm not going to break the ice. If you're the one that's interested, you have to break the ice. You have to tell me what this thing costs before we start haggling over it.
And it also, you give up some of that leverage, right? When you write and say, what do you need for Bijan Robinson? That tells me that you really want Bijan Robinson.
Yep.
And I'm going to up that price tag because that's the only player that you're really looking to acquire. Once it becomes obvious, what your trade target is, and that's obviously not for every case. There are, times when, but I feel like don't give away all of your leverage. Leave them guessing just a little bit.
Yeah. All right, man. I want to talk about how to sell high and when do you know is the right time to sell high. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which means getting tickets faster and even easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you, and save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And get this, you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Matt, I want to talk to you about selling high because this is one of the most important things in Dynasty. When do you know when to sell high and get the maximum amount of value from a player?
So there's two examples I want to bring up here. I think it was 2 years ago, maybe it was only a year, but I took over a horrific, orphan team that was really, really bad. And I knew it was going to be horrible all last year, the 2023 season. So, before that, because I was horrific. I took over the team. I had 1-1. I drafted Bijan. I used Bijan all last year in his rookie season. And then I got to my rookie draft this year and realized I have Bijan, I have Kincaid, and then I have a bunch of like Josh Downs level dudes that I like, but could be part of the rebuild, but I'm so far away. So I semi-subtly just put it out there. Hey, if someone's interested in Bijan Robinson, give me a call, before our draft started. And I got trade offers like crazy. He was an obvious, attack that type of player. We brought him up a lot because he's super hot. And when it was all said and done, I sold him for tons of first round picks. Some of them are in 2026. It was just deep down, I thought he has to go. My roster is so bad. There's no chance during Bijan's next 2-3 years he's going to help me win. I have to turn him into 5 different things. So that worked out well. And there's an owner that the first time I ever got in Dynasty, he's the commissioner of the league. And I've really paid attention to him because he wins a lot. And he drafts running backs thoroughly. He has no problem drafting running backs, but he keeps them 2 years and then he dumps them. He is a great he's very disciplined about drafting Nick Chubb, getting 2 years out of him, and then he's gone for future firsts. And he does it over and over and over with running backs. And inevitably, one of the 11 people in the league jump on a second. It's like trading Breece Hall right now, or a year from now trading Breece Hall. Like, never let him get to 26, let alone 27 years old.
Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And especially at the running back position, which we preach is, a 2 to 3 year position on your dynasty roster. And that's the way that we need to approach the position in general. So for, a situation like Matt in your circumstance where he's not going to be useful to you in that period where he's probably going to be the most useful to fantasy managers on his rookie contract. Yeah, that's this time where you can identify that this is a prime sell high position. Now, again, looking at age, you don't want to let your running backs get to that like 26-ish mark. I'll also say, even if age isn't the defining number, look at the touch totals. Look at where they rank among active running backs in terms of total touches. And you can gain immense insight from, how long is this player going to last? Obviously, Derrick Henry is the league's greatest anomaly, but generally speaking, like after a player is up on their rookie deal, Raheem Mostert is the exception to that rule. Like when their touch totals start creeping up there, once they get to like that 1,000 career rushes, right? And I'm like, you know what? We're probably about to hit a brick wall. But it is always better to sell high than to wait when this window has kind of already passed, because that is how you're going to keep, trading, getting youth, and creating this cycle of a long living dynasty.
And I think running back is probably the easiest position to sell high because
yeah.
we have just such an obvious drop off at, age 26, 27, 28. But Matt, what about at receiver? Like, how do you handle selling high at receiver? Are you willing to be maybe 1 or even 2 years too early to sell a guy? Like I'm looking at AJ Brown right now, who is being drafted as wide receiver 8 in Dynasty. He's 27. Is that an example of somebody that you would sell high on, or are you willing to wait a little bit longer there?
Real quick on the running backs. I think those are all phenomenal points, but they're definitely going to get you more. That 1,000 touch running back is going to get you more in week 6 than he is in July. You know what I mean? Like, don't make that you have to get this guy out of there, because once a couple running backs get hurt, someone's going to give you something for that guy that better than they will today. As for receivers, I think I know you guys well enough that you're always going to be pretty stocked at that position. You're not going to, build through running backs and be light at receiver. One thing I do like to do, especially on my stacked teams, and we've all been there, like this team's really good, and I have 6 or 7 receivers that everyone on the planet would start, and I can only start 4 of them. I might put all of them on my trade bait, and that's all. You get an email from me of just 7 stud receivers in your trade bait, and see if who you like. You know what I mean? If you're like Ayuk right now was one of those guys. I'm like, I love Brandon Ayuk, but he's probably better for the real world than he is fantasy. Is he going to be a Niner? Are they ever going to be a high volume offense? I love the player, but I also have Garrett Wilson and Jamar Chase in that league. Like, let's not put Chase and Wilson on the email, but Metcalf and Ayuk, and see who bites,
I've got one follow-up question really quickly. So when you've decided that you want to sell high, let's say we're going to use Brandon Ayuk as the example. Do you think you have more success going to the managers individually in offering trades, or have you found it better just to say, hey, they're on the trade block, bring me your offers?
Names like that draw flies. Like, I don't think you have to search out individual owners when you have guys that are top 3-4 rounds in startup. I mean, it's assuming everyone opens their email, someone's at least going to offer you something for those guys. And I'm the same way. I mean, if it comes across and I'm a mediocre team, this guy's trading Ayuk, I'm at least going to throw in a 75% what I would have paid for and get the, break the ice that way.
Yeah. Kate, what do you think?
Now, this is one of those circumstances that I do think it's kind of perfect. Like, send out your initial trade bait email, right? And then let's see what you get back. But like, if you don't get the bites that you're looking for, this is when I look at each team's individual roster and I say, like, what pairing in a trade makes sense? Because I'm going to be honest, I don't think every team is meant to trade with one another. Like, conceptually, maybe yes, every team can theoretically trade with each other, but there are certain times where I'm looking at their goals versus my goals, my needs versus their needs, and I'm like, there's not a trade that's mutually beneficial. So when I have a player that I'm looking to sell high on, I'm looking at somebody whose needs are going to be met by this player that has assets that are going to mutually meet my needs. And that really just entails combing through your list of rosters and seeing like, all right, I want to sell high on Bijan Robinson, who is in a win now position that has a need at running back. And that's where I start, because those managers are going to be the ones that, we're going to find a mutually beneficial trade. And I think that those are the best trades to find. Those ones that like make you a little scared to click send because it's a good trade, right? And I think that's kind of my approach in that situation is like, if you're not getting the bites on the trade bait, you need to look at every roster and find the best fit and find who actually has the need. Because I'm going to be honest, like as a dynasty manager, it kind of, another pet peeve of mine is when I get a trade offer for something that I have no need for, right? If I'm deep at quarterback, don't send me an offer for the quarterback that you're trying to offload. Like, look at my roster,
What does this do for me? Right.
And that's the courtesy that I also give to other managers. Like, I'm not going to send you, another wide receiver if I know you're top heavy at wide receiver, because that wouldn't make sense, right? Like, I think just being sensible and being considerate in that sort of way is an excellent way to not just get a trade done, but also build good rapport with your fellow managers in terms of building relationships to trade more in the future.
Especially at quarterback and tight end, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially.
Right. Like I have Kincaid and Kelsey, don't offer me Bowers,
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about trade vetoes, commissioner vetoes, league vetoes. We will get to all of that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, we will be off on Thursday and Friday for the holiday weekend, but we'll be right back here on Monday, updating you on all of the latest news in Dynasty League football. But let's finish up here talking about trade veto. So there's really three options here. You can have no vetoes, you can have a commissioner veto, and you can have a league veto where everybody votes. Matt, what are your just general thoughts on vetoing in fantasy leagues?
So it hasn't come up a lot over the years, but I do think, and this is harder when, like I mentioned, that I don't know these human beings, well. I know their screen name, I know their tendencies, I know their team, but I don't know what they look like. I don't know their personalities. But I do think having a veto committee for every trade, like it has to pass this committee, is terrible. I mean, because someone could just be a pain in the butt or doesn't want you to have the player to compete with them down the stretch or whatever. But I do think there has to be some open lines of communication. I mean, there's been times where the email comes through. I'm like, oh, there was a trade in the league. Let's check it out. I'm like, come on, guys. Like I would at least then make a message board topic. Is everybody else cool with this? Because I don't think this is even relevantly close. But it has to be pretty extreme for me to do something like that.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
I'm so team not veto. Do not veto. No commissioner veto. No league veto. And here's the thing. I think you need to trust your league mates, and if you don't, not a good dynasty league, period. Apparently I have very strong opinions on this, but there's honestly probably no bigger pet peeve than vetoes in leagues. And I think what that kind of diminishes is the ability for managers to make their own player evaluations. I don't want to make my roster decisions based off of your evaluation of a player. I understand, the desire for parity, but as Marcus and I said on yesterday's episode, part 1 of our trade advice discussion, I said, generally speaking, you're not going to know who quote unquote wins a trade for probably 2 to 3 years, depending on the assets involved in the trade, whether there are future picks involved. Like, there's really not an ironclad way to properly evaluate a dynasty trade until significant time has passed. So that in and of itself just makes me want to hogwash it all together. There have been plenty of trades, and do yourselves a favor, go 1 year back in your trade history in your league and see some of the trades that you either were sent or you sent off yourself, and how silly they look 1 year later.
Yeah.
And I think that's all the perspective you need to see, like, yeah, player evaluations change so rapidly. And, this long-term nature of the league makes it such that there are no outright winners. If you're in a redraft league, it becomes a lot more apparent who wins and loses that trade immediately. In
And
Dynasty, I just don't think that's the case.
and you hate having to explain yourself. Like, Matt, why were you thinking that this was a good trade? Well, because I squeaked Luke Musgrave out of him, and he doesn't think he's good, and I think he's awesome. I don't want to show you my hand of how I'm thinking on every player evaluation. You know what I mean?
So I play in several leagues where the league members can vote on a veto. And first of all, I hate it. Just to be clear, I absolutely hate it.
Mhm.
One of my biggest and longest dynasty leagues, there's 12 managers, and it only takes 6 vetoes for a trade to get shot down. I actually had a trade last year. Again, this is a super flex league where I traded Jonathan Taylor, and I believe it was Jake Ferguson in a second round pick for Patrick Mahomes. Now, I get it. It's not a great trade, right? But the other manager accepted it. And with about 2 hours, that trade got vetoed because the other managers in the league believed that they could offer better trades. Well, that's not really the point of Dynasty, right? Like, you should have had, if you thought you could have made a better trade offer, make the better trade offer before he accepts something else. Those leagues are horrible to play in. Please do not agree to play in leagues where you can have only 6 players, especially if it's like a family and friends league, because there's just too many people that'll get together. They'll get angry. They'll get jealous that a trade got made that they didn't make. Please don't play in those leagues.
Yeah. And I do think that that's an excellent point, that like sometimes, a veto is supposed to be a fail-safe measure to prevent collusion. But
yes, not because I didn't get to make a trade.
Yes, vetoes are actually used to collude. Like,
yes,
call it what it is. I've seen many more vetoes that were, I'm going to label as collusion, because it's, managers gathering together to do, Marcus, what you said, like, they wanted to get the trade done and they didn't get the trade done.
I'm going to give you even some more context in this league, just because I want to show you what happened. My quarterbacks in this super flex league were Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers. And I think I was 7-1 at the time that Kirk Cousins got hurt and I was out of quarterback. So that's why I was making this move for Patrick Mahomes. The rest of the league mates thought, hey, this is a good way to make sure that Marcus doesn't get a quarterback, so he's not going to contend.
And that's collusion.
That's collusion.
Of
course.
That is the exact thing you're trying to prevent.
Made the playoffs out in round 1 because I had no quarterback. That is not what trade vetoes are for, is because you're envious of another trade getting done. It's garbage.
And everyone in the league's going, well, that's all it costs to get Mahomes. You get your trade vetoed, and then I'm sitting over there, owner X, going, I'm going to offer the exact same thing for Mahomes plus $2.
And that's exactly what happened. Mahomes got traded 4 days later to a manager that vetoed the trade.
That's awful.
Yeah, don't play in those leagues.
Right.
And if you are playing in those leagues, like, this is the off season, right? This is the time where you should be empowered to, reach out to your commish. This is the time to vote on new league settings, new league rules. Like, if you're in a league with a veto, consider all this information for what you will. But again, this tool to prevent collusion often is used as a tool to collude. Like, this is the prime off season to go to your commissioner and say, can we take a vote on this? Like, this is my case against league vetoes, or even, whatever league rule you're trying to change. But
Matt, I want to ask you, how do you feel about a commissioner veto? So only one person, and they only strike down trades that are just so obviously, 2 owners colluding.
No, I think that's too much power.
Too much power. So you're just completely against vetoes altogether.
I don't have a problem with how I mentioned, if something ugly comes across your email, to at least bring it up for discussion amongst all the members, and therefore your commissioner has to do some commissioning. That person might have to be like, well, there's not enough evidence to do anything about this, or 10 other people of the 12 really have a problem with it. I'm going to step in and flip it,
I'm just going to give one piece of advice before we go. One of the things that's helped in my leagues is to avoid some colluding. Anytime that you make a trade, you have to at least put aside some money for your next year's entry fee. Because what I've seen in previous leagues is somebody will try to sell off all their pieces to a family member or friend member, and then they'll say, oh, I'm not playing next year because my team's not very good. If you can at least get the managers that are making trades to pay ahead for the following year or 2 years, I feel like that does help some of these really wonky trades that end up going through.
Every league I'm good. I'm sorry. Every league I'm in, if you trade a future first, you owe that fee,
which makes sense.
And a couple of them, if you trade any future picks, you at least have to pay a portion of next year's fee.
Kate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I think that's a great rule. And that just kind of brings me back to the original point on vetoing, especially in dynasty leagues, because of the longevity, especially if you are having people pay for their entries for future first round picks, future, etc. Because this is a long game, I think it's a lot harder to collude in a dynasty league than it is in a redraft, right? Because your roster, you might quote unquote collude to, split the pot with another winner, right? The winner of the league this year. But your collusion has ripple effects into next year, the following year. Like,
yep.
It's not in the bubble that is redraft. Like, again, that just brings me back to my point. Vetoes are useless.
That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Go follow Kate at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier. Enjoy your holiday weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.